Hi everyone, this is Marc Zawel. I'm the co-founder of AcceptU. Excited to be here to present to you our MIT Sloan Essay Analysis for 2014-2015 in conjunction with our partners over at Beat the GMAT in this Write Like an Expert series. Before we get underway, just a couple of housekeeping items. The first is would invite all of you to download a copy of this presentation off of our website. You can do that by going to the link up there on your screen, learnmore.acceptu.com/MIT. And then for those of you who are viewing this live today, or those of you who may be viewing this recording in the future, also would invite you to sign up for an admissions assessment with one of AcceptU's former admissions officers, and you can sign up. Again, the link is on your screen, learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. So just to give you a brief introduction on AcceptU, AcceptU is an admissions counseling group comprised entirely of former admissions officers from top 25 business schools. We've gone to these business schools and we've recruited admissions officers to join our team, come sit on the other side of the table, so to speak, and assist our clients on all aspects of the admissions process. All of our counseling is done virtually, so by phone, Skype, and email, and our counseling has helped hundreds of applicants gain a competitive advantage in the process and place them into the business schools of their choice. Last year, more than 90% of the clients that we worked with were accepted to one of their top 3 choices. And we really attribute that to our counselors as former MBA admissions officers being able to provide our clients with real insight into how admissions decisions are made and what they can do to best strategically position themselves to stand out in this highly competitive process. Just to give you some background on myself, I'm the author of a top-selling admissions guidebook called Untangling the Ivy League. I'm a graduate of Cornell University. I also have an MBA from UNC Chapel Hill. While at UNC Chapel Hill, I was very actively involved with the admissions advisory board there, evaluating application essays, also helping the admissions office develop a new application essay question. And as I previously mentioned, all of the other counselors here on our team at AcceptU are former MBA admissions officers. We have counselors from schools like Columbia, Cornell, Penn, Stanford, many of the top 20 programs. So with that introduction, I do want to jump into the presentation today on MIT Sloan. This is our second year doing an essay analysis for Sloan. There's a lot of information that I'm going to try to cover in this presentation. We also are going to take some Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions that come up over the course of these upcoming slides, feel free to chat them over, and then I'll try as best I can to answer as many questions as time permits. I would just ask that the questions, if possible, pertain to as wide of an audience as possible. Please no kind of more personal questions, just because we want this to be applicable to the group. And if you have more specific questions, you're welcome to contact AcceptU, and we can schedule a one-on-one consultation to discuss those specific questions or concerns that you have. So what we've done with the presentation is broken it up very broadly into 4 categories. The first is kind of forming the baseline or the foundation to this entire approach with your application essays. I want to talk about what is the goal that you are trying to achieve as applicants in the process, and in particular, utilizing the application essays as one piece to your overall application and the strategy that you're taking to help you stand out from other applicants. Once we've gone kind of through that initial kind of foundational component, we'll then talk about strategically approaching the writing process. What kind of introspection should you be going through in preparation for the process? What are some of the initial questions that you should be asking yourself even before approaching these application questions from MIT? Next, we'll jump into the nitty-gritty of the MIT Sloan application essays this year. One of the application essays is a repeat from last year, and then there's the second question is brand new for this year, and the second question is quite interesting. And so we're going to spend a bit of time really digging into those two questions, as well as the optional essay, which we'll kind of discuss in greater detail. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some very broad, high-level suggestions on how to actually get started with this writing process. Putting pen to paper or getting your fingers going on the keyboard. What steps should you be going through to begin the application essays for Sloan and for the other business schools that you're applying to? So to start, we'll go with that first topic, your goal with the MIT application essays. So why are your MIT essays important? First and foremost, admissions officers, the goal of this process is for them to learn more about you, your background, and your interests. And it's important to be thinking at a very high level about what role your application essays are going to be playing in conjunction with the other more qualitative pieces of your application. You have to think about your application essays in playing a complementary role to your letters of recommendation, as well as to your resume, as well as to your interview. And in sum, how are all these pieces going to allow you to come across in a really kind of compelling and interesting way to admissions officers who are going to very quickly assess your application? Considering the amount of time that you as applicants will invest in this application process and the application essays, admissions officers will blaze through your application materials. They will read everything, but there are a lot of applications to be reviewed, and the reality is that you need to kind of think about how each of the pieces of your application are going to play a different role, so that in sum, you are coming across as a really interesting and compelling candidate. The essays are important also because they give a voice to your application. If you've gone into the MIT Sloan application or other business school applications, you'll see that there's a lot of data points. They're going to be asking you about your personal background, your work experience, your salary. It's a lot of just data-driven information. And then you have the essays. And the essays are really an opportunity for you to become someone to an admissions officer, someone beyond just a data point. Someone who has a voice, someone who has a story, someone who has some emotion. So the essays are really quite interesting to admissions officers who are looking at all of these data points and then trying to really get to the essence of who this applicant is. And they want to feel a connection with you as an applicant. They want to envision who you are as an applicant and who you will be on their campus and how you will contribute in ways that perhaps other applicants cannot. Beyond the voice, strong writing can show thoughtfulness, analysis, communication skills. These are all skills that are not just going to be important to you in the application process, but also important to you in business school and important to you in your future career. So at some level, the admissions officers are assessing not just the content of your application essays, but also the thought process that you've gone through, as well as your overall writing and communication abilities. As I've said before, essays are really the primary tool in which you can stand out from other academically qualified applicants. Now, this is true for all top 20 or top 25 business schools, but especially at highly rigorous programs like MIT Sloan, where the academic qualifications of applicants is quite exceptional. You see applicants that have really extraordinary undergraduate or master's GPAs, very, very strong GMAT scores, and it's almost a prerequisite to applying to a program like Sloan. But admissions officers are not going to be making decisions on applicants based on their academic qualifications alone, because there are so many applicants that have very, very similar academic qualifications that want to attend that program. So your essays are the way that you can stand out from other academically qualified applicants and move from a broader pool of academically qualified applicants into those applicants that are going to be admitted to that program. Finally, the MIT essays can be helpful to you as an applicant because you'll be able to address any potential weaknesses and or extenuating circumstances that you don't have an opportunity to address in other parts to the application. You can address these weaknesses or extenuating circumstances in the optional essay. You can also address them in one of the main two application essays. And depending on what you're trying to address, you may want to take a different approach in terms of how you address it. You could also address it in letters of recommendation, but we'll talk a little bit more about the optional essay as well as kind of addressing weaknesses later on in the presentation. So that gives you a good, I think, introduction to what your goal should be with your application essays at Sloan or at other business schools. I now want to get into strategically approaching the writing process. What are the steps that you should be taking even before looking at the application essays? What are the questions that you should be asking yourself about your interest in going to business school, and in particular, your interest in going to MIT Sloan? So before you even look, well, I'm sure most, if not all of you, have already looked at the questions, but before you sit down to start drafting an essay, you need to take a step back and do some self-reflection. This is something that we work very closely with our clients on here at AcceptU, and we found that if you invest time at the outset with really doing some introspection and some self-reflection, you will be well served in the longer term in terms of the quality of the writing and the level of insight that you can provide admissions officers. So think very broadly about your interest in pursuing an MBA. Typically, applicants are falling into one of two categories. They're either looking to accelerate their career or they're looking to change their career. If you're looking to change your career, you can have and build a stronger justification for why you want to go to business school than perhaps if you are saying that you simply want to accelerate your career. Because if you're looking to change your career, whether you're looking to change your industry or you're looking to change your functional role or you're looking to change both, really the only means for you to do so is through pursuit of an MBA. Because an MBA is going to provide you with the skills, both the quantitative skills as well as the qualitative skills. It's going to provide you with the professional network. It's going to provide you with an immersive experience with an internship between the first and the second year in which you can explore your future potential career interest. It's really the only way that you'll be able to make this type of career change. Career acceleration can be a little bit harder to justify to admissions officers because essentially what you're saying is that your career has stagnated, you need an MBA in order to continue growing in your career. But if you didn't get an MBA, you likely would be able to achieve the same goal. It just might take a little bit more time. Another question that is important for you to be thinking about initially, even before starting to write your application essays, is why MIT is a good fit for you. What is unique about MIT? One of the challenges that we see in working with our clients is that they have a difficult time initially differentiating between many of these top 5, 10, 20 business schools. The reality is that many of these business schools are very similar in terms of the strength of their programs and the resources that are available to students. What really is the difference between MIT Sloan and other top business schools? And as an applicant, you really need to dig into the particular business schools that you are interested in applying to and be able to articulate why that school is such a good fit for you in ways that other top business schools are not. So the best way for you to initially do this is through your own independent research. If you have an opportunity to come and visit Sloan, then that's probably the best way for you to better inform your interest in that program. It's also going to provide you with a lot of direct and personal experience that you'll be able to draw upon in your application materials and in your application essays. be able to talk about, say, a visit to campus and how that visit reinforced your strong interest in that program. If you are unable to come here to Boston or Cambridge to visit MIT or to visit any of the other business schools that you're planning on applying to, that will not necessarily be held against you. But if you don't, then you certainly want to take additional proactive steps to learn more about why this particular school is such a good fit. And you can contact the admissions office, you can speak with current students, you can speak with presidents of clubs that are in the career areas in which you would be interested in pursuing. There are certainly things that you could do more remotely or virtually to inform your interest in that school, but build a running list or tally of what is unique and different about this particular school, and then keep that list close by. And we'll talk more about how you utilize that list when you sit down to actually begin working on your application essays. Another question that is important to start considering very early on is how you will be able to contribute in ways that other applicants will not. And in the same way that many of the top business schools have quite a bit of similarity between them, it turns out that many of the applicants also have a lot of similarity between them too. And so you have to start thinking very critically about what makes you unique or different as an applicant. How are you as an applicant in a unique position to contribute to this, to say classroom discussions, to study group discussions, to the overall experience of other students in ways that other applicants cannot? And it's really this last question that which starts to build off of this idea of establishing differentiators that again is a question that you really need to dig into, and I want to spend a little bit more time just focusing specifically on this particular area. So when you look at a school like MIT, where you've got maybe around 1 in 10 that are admitted, you have to put yourself in the shoes of an admissions officer. Now picture these admissions officers in the fall here in Cambridge and saying, sitting in front of their computers evaluating applicants and looking at two applicants that are very similar academically. Maybe they have similar undergraduate degrees, maybe they have similar GPAs, maybe they have very similar professional experience in terms of where they work or the level that they are at in terms of with their career. Maybe their GMAT scores are very, very similar too. What is going to make an admissions officer admit one of these applicants over another? You have to start to think about your differentiators and what unique qualities you can bring that other applicants cannot. And here at AcceptU, we suggest to our clients, and we work very closely with our clients, to build a list of 3 to 5 key differentiators. This is something that you want to do initially before you start to work on the application essays, because these 3 to 5 key differentiators will form the foundation of your MIT essays. So you might be sitting there and saying, well, what are differentiators? How am I different from other applicants? That's a great question. Here's how you can start to determine your differentiators. Differentiators can be both personal or professional. I think that one of the mistakes that many applicants to business school make is assume that because they're applying to business school, it's all about their professional experience. It's all about their professional accomplishments. And I'm not discounting the importance of having a very strong career, having accomplishments that can be quantifiable, having a work experience that has been impactful. But it's important to also open up on the personal side when it comes to your applications and your essays. Because again, if you think about differentiators, there are going to be many other applicants that have very similar professional accomplishments as you too. Now, it's really on the personal side that you are you and no one else is really like you as an applicant. So think about incorporating some of these personal differentiators into your overall application strategy, because these should hopefully be unique really to you and no one else. But also you don't want to only include obviously personal differentiators. There needs to be a mix between both personal as well as professional. So with your differentiators, consider some of these potential directions that you could go in. First, leadership. Leadership, either prior leadership or future leadership potential. And the key there is future leadership potential. That is something that is valued quite highly by admissions officers at Sloan and at other top business schools. In fact, when we get to the application essay analysis, we'll talk more about this idea of future potential versus what you've done in the past. Second, professional accomplishments. You want to highlight these in terms of the impact that you have had on the organization or organizations which you've worked at. Admissions officers care much less about what your role or responsibilities have been and much more about what you've been able to achieve. And they're really quite interested in if you can quantify your achievement. If you can put a percentage or a dollar sign or some sort of data behind your accomplishment, it's going to allow them to put into perspective your accomplishment with other applicants that are coming from various industries and functional roles that are different from where you're coming from. Geographic, ethnic, socioeconomic, gender, or other diversity. This is more kind of personal diversity, but it can play a strong factor in your overall chances of gaining admission. So if you have some of this diversity or other diversity, consider utilizing it as one of your key differentiators in your application essays. Unique prior work experience. If you're coming from a non-traditional career in terms of applicants to business school, then this is something that can really be fully utilized to your advantage. Admissions officers are looking to have there be a diverse group of students with respect to their prior work experience. So if you have some diversity there with where you're coming from, think about utilizing that as a differentiator. Same goes for a less traditional future career interest. The vast majority of applicants are looking at management, consulting, or finance, and with nothing against either of those two areas, which business schools are well known for in terms of career placement. If you aren't interested in one of those two areas, there's going to be some more means of differentiation because far fewer applicants are interested in areas like, say, entrepreneurship or supply chain management or even marketing or sales. Real estate is another area that tends to be not too heavily represented in MBA programs. When you're building your list of differentiators, you want to get feedback from others. This is not something that you can really do on your own. It's helpful to have others guide you through this conversation. It's why we as admissions consultants work very closely with our clients on this process because we can provide them with that type of independent or third-party feedback. But you could also consider others who you've known for a longer period of time. Maybe you have mentors, maybe you have colleagues that you've spent time with over an extended period of your career. You can also, if you're not comfortable speaking with others, at a minimum, look back at your past performance reviews or evaluations. Are there recurring themes in terms of what's highlighted in your performance reviews or evaluations that you can then, at a high level, start to see as potential differentiators? You don't want to ask family, asking a spouse, asking a significant other, asking your parents. They're probably not going to be a great source of unbiased information because of your relationship, your pre-existing relationship with them. So try to find others that don't have that same attachment to you and who can really speak to, at an unbiased level, what they think makes you somewhat unique or different. So we've talked now about differentiators. Now let's figure out or discuss what are the values or characteristics that Sloan is actually looking for in applicants. Sloan is pretty forthright about this is what we're looking for in applicants in terms of key qualities. So as I mentioned before, Sloan is well known for its the quality of the academic achievement in the applicant pool. So high academic potential, which is typically expressed through GMAT as well as GPA, both perhaps undergraduate or graduate if an applicant has a master's degree, is a really important criteria that admissions officers at Sloan are looking at. They're also looking for personal achievement. They're looking for strong self-motivation. Motivation is going to tie very closely into one of the application essays for this year. They want to know what motivates you and what your thought process is in the decisions that you've made, both personally as well as professionally. And then finally, as with many other top business schools, there's this idea of identifying leaders and leadership. And for them, they say a natural sense of leadership, not just leadership, but actually that you're a natural leader. And that could be an important nuance in terms of natural leadership versus just demonstrated leadership. But up on Sloan's admissions website, they discuss a little bit about what they are most interested in their applicants. And they very clearly say that they're interested in the path to accomplishment as they are in the results. And they want to know the effect that you've had on people with who you engage and in turn how you influence the world around you. And that emphasis is mine. But this idea of the process in which you go through is equally, if not more important than the result, is an important thing to be thinking about, because it is allowing admissions officers to get a sense of the way in which you evaluate situations and how you make decisions. And they, from that, can extrapolate the way in which you would, in the future, make similar decisions through a similar type of thought process. So it's the thought process that they're most interested in, not necessarily the accomplishment itself. I mean, if the accomplishment is great on top of that, then you get bonus points. But it's really the thought process that they're most interested in. And we'll talk a lot more about this with the essay analysis for one of the essay questions for this year in a couple of slides. So, and just to kind of wrap up that slide, as I've said several times, Sloan is emphasizing this idea of prior thought process as a future performance predictor. Meaning environments change, situations change, but your thought process and the way in which you address challenges and the way that you strategically assess situations is going to stay the same. If you now know your strengths, if you now know your differentiators, and you now know what MIT is looking for, now you're on the right path to writing compelling essays. And it's really important. I know that application deadlines are kind of on the horizon, and it's very easy to just want to jump into it and start writing. But please go through this process initially, because you're going to have stronger application essays, and you're going to spend less time working on your application essays than you would if you didn't invest a little bit of time at the outset. The last kind of caveat that I wanted to throw out there before we get into the essays themselves is don't write what you think admissions officers want you to write. A lot of applicants fall into this trap. They are looking at others that have been, say, successful in getting admitted to a school like Sloan and saying, well, if I write a similar essay or if I talk about similar things, then I'm also going to get in and I'm also going to be successful. But just because an applicant has been successful in the process utilizing certain essays does not mean that if you were to write something similar that you'll be equally successful. So you need to write what you should write, not what you think admissions officers want you to write. At the end of the process, it's all about just being real and someone. I talked earlier about essays as the one tool that you have to stand out in a sea of just data points. You need to come across as someone who's interesting, someone who's likable, someone who's compelling, someone who admissions officers would want to interact with, you can forget that admissions officers are people that work at these business schools, and they're on campus, and they're interacting with current students, and they want to admit applicants that they want to interact with. And they also want to admit applicants that they feel are going to represent the school well, because if they admit applicants who represent the school well, it's going to make their jobs as admissions officers easier, because they're going to have these representatives of the school that they're able to really show as good examples of what the degree can provide. So we've talked now about just strategically approaching the writing process and some of the steps that you should take even before getting into the writing process. And now I want to jump into the application essays themselves. Both, there's 2 questions this year as well as an optional essay, and we'll now get into some analysis of the questions as well as the optional essay. We need to start with the instructions, because it's actually quite surprising the number of applicants who don't follow instructions or directions in the application process. And it sounds so rudimentary and so basic, but you need to follow instructions. And if you don't follow instructions, it can be a real red flag for you, because it's essentially showing admissions officers that you haven't even taken the time to read the instructions for the application. So this year, MIT is asking that, and they're kind of articulating to applicants that they're interested in learning more about you, which we've been just talking about. In each of the essays, please describe in detail what you thought, felt, said, and did. And then please draw upon experiences which have occurred in the past 3 years. That emphasis is mine. Thought, felt, said, and did. Past 3 years. Those are 2 things that you have to keep. Maybe you write them down on a sticky note and put them on your computer screen so that you are constantly thinking about that when writing these application essays. There are a couple other, just 2 other changes from this year's application from last year's. And the first is that there's actually an increase in the word count allocation, which as admissions consultants here at AcceptU, we were actually a little bit surprised, because there has been a trend over the last several years of a decreasing word limit. So to see an increase in word limit is kind of interesting. They're giving you more of an opportunity to take advantage of the application essays as opposed to less, which is really what we've seen over the last couple of years across all of these top 10 and top 20 business schools. And then second, you have the new write your own letter of recommendation essay, as opposed to previously last year, when this essay was not included. So essay 1 is talking about your support of the MIT Sloan mission. And the mission of Sloan, according to the admissions office, is to develop principled and innovative leaders who improve the world and to generate ideas that advance management practice. And they're asking specifically, how will you contribute toward advancing this mission of developing principled, innovative leaders who improve the world, and also utilizing examples from either your prior work experience or your other activities. I think one of the traps that applicants fall into with this essay in particular is that they just assume that this is the standard Y MBA essay. And for those of you that are just starting to embark on this process, the Y MBA essay is a pretty standard essay across many top business schools, and essentially it's getting at answers to some of the questions that we talked about earlier. Why are you interested in an MBA? Why are you interested in an MBA right now? What are you looking to do in the short term or the long term with your career? This is not really that kind of essay, though. as we talked about earlier, Sloan feels very strongly about past experiences as indicative of future behavior. And what you also really need to highlight and think very kind of focus on a bit are these two terms, principled and innovative. Because if the mission of the school is to develop principled and innovative leaders, you need to know what these leaders are in order to show admissions officers how you're going to be able to contribute toward advancing this mission or supporting this mission. In our opinion, principled is all about being moral, ethical, and thoughtful. And innovative, which at a school like MIT is just so important, is outside the box, taking, so to speak, the road less traveled, something that's really unique. And so you're talking about ethical and innovative leaders, leaders that are not going down the path that everyone is going down, but also are very thoughtful and are very moral in the decisions that they're making. That's essentially the type of leaders that they're looking to identify in applicants. It's also about generating ideas that advance management practice, and this is like a very lofty goal for the school. And not to discount the second piece to the mission, but we would recommend focusing much more on development of the principled innovative leaders, as opposed to focusing more on these ideas of contributing to advancing management practice, which is just it's a little theoretical and it's a pretty lofty goal. But we can talk a little bit about how you balance these two in 500 words or fewer. And the word count, we do not typically advise our clients to go more than 10% over the allocated word limit. Now, 500 words fits pretty nicely also on one page. So if you really have something compelling that you cannot fit into 500 words, then if you need to run over, you need to run over. But if you don't need to run over, then don't run over. Stick to what the word limit is. Remember, it's also about following instructions and making sure that you stick within the confines and the constraints of what the admissions officers are asking you to stick within. When you're putting together some brainstorming or some drafting of this essay, what we would recommend is that you consider 2 or possibly 3 examples that are supportive of your contribution to Sloan's mission. When you're utilizing examples in this type of essay, you need to cut to the chase. Remember, you only have 500 words. That word count is going to fill up very, very quickly if you spend 100 words setting the stage. If you spend 100 words setting the stage and you're using 2 examples, you've almost utilized half of your essay just establishing the scenario and establishing the scene. So you have to cut right to the chase. Discuss the situation, what you were looking to achieve in that particular situation. Ideally, there were some challenges. Well, not ideally, there were some challenges. If there were challenges, ideally, you were able to effectively address some of those challenges. And then the real kicker here is why did you approach it in that principled and innovative way? If you're just using an example that doesn't directly relate to this idea of principled and innovative approach, then it's not an appropriate example for you to be utilizing. The last component is probably the most important, because the last piece of this is probably the most important, because admissions officers are trying to draw parallels between your examples that you're utilizing in your application essay and what you'll ultimately end up doing when you're a student. So you can talk about the situation, you can talk about what you're looking to achieve, the challenges, how you approached it in a principled and innovative way, but it's really all about how and why this will then enable you to contribute in a way that will be really impactful. It's about advancing the mission. It's about what will you do as a student on campus. So you need to take that next step in utilizing these examples, and also keep in mind, as we talked about earlier, that it's about the process. Remember, the thought, felt, said, and did. It's more important that you had a sound thought process behind the situation than actually the achievement or the goal that came as a result of it. Your examples here can be personal or professional. If you're going to use two, maybe you want there to be a mix of one personal, one professional. If you're only going to use professional, then keep in mind that with this next essay is also going to fall into more of a professional category. The second essay being the write your own letter of recommendation. And as I discussed earlier, you do want to give admissions officers some insight into your personal. So if you know that your second essay is 100% professional, or maybe 99% professional, then it's really this essay is your only opportunity to highlight some personal differentiators. And so you probably would want to, if you have some personal differentiators, highlight them in this essay as an example, because it's really going to be your only opportunity to do so. The other kind of piece to consider with essay, with this first essay, is that if you can have examples that are supportive of your future career goals, that is really critical to admissions officers assessing the likelihood that you'll be able to achieve that goal. Now, at MIT Sloan, admissions officers are asking questions like, okay, given this applicant's prior work experience as well as the resources that are going to be available to the applicant on campus, what's the likelihood that this applicant will be able to achieve this goal? So if you have examples that are showing skills or experiences that you've had that you feel will improve the likelihood that you're able to attain the goal that you're setting out to achieve and the reason that you're applying to business school, then utilize those examples, because it's going to only reinforce your interest and your justification and why you are interested in going to business school. If you are utilizing these types of examples, you can almost, in some ways, take it one step further and talk very, very briefly about how MIT will help you achieve some of these goals, because you're really articulating fit with the program, as well as how you would contribute, which is kind of one of those larger questions that we had discussed a little bit earlier. Now, Essay 2, which is a new essay for this year, is a pretty challenging essay. It's unusual because you're being asked to write a professional letter of recommendation on behalf of yourself, and so it's kind of requiring you to take yourself out of your position and put yourself into the position of someone else evaluating you. Which if you do those initial steps of the process, which I had recommended, like speaking with other mentors or colleagues or past supervisors, like you're going to start to get some sense of like how others view you, and this is what's essentially going to have to be incorporated into this type of second essay, this letter of recommendation. They ask that you answer the following questions as if you were your most recent supervisor recommending yourself for admission to MIT Sloan. This is the essay that's allowing you 750 words. There are 6 questions that they're asking you to answer in this letter of recommendation. How long and in what capacity have you known the applicant? How does the applicant stand out from others in a similar capacity? Please give an example of the applicant's impact on a person, group, or organization. Please give a representative example of how the applicant interacts with other people. Which of the applicant's personal or professional characteristics would you change? That's kind of an interesting question to pose. And then please tell us anything else you think we should know about this applicant. What's kind of funny about this essay is that these are actually the questions that you will provide your letter of recommendation writers to answer. So you can almost see admissions officers reading your letter of recommendation and then comparing your letter of recommendation with the letters of recommendation from your supervisor or from others who are going to be writing on your behalf. When it comes to analyzing this second question from Sloan, you don't necessarily need to answer these questions chronologically. This is an essay, but it's also supposed to be a letter. So have it read like a letter. You don't need to answer the first question first, the second question next, the third question after then. There should be some more natural progression. This should read like an actual letter, not like you're simply answering these questions one after the next. And along similar lines, you don't necessarily need to devote the same amount of space to each question. So you don't have to look at each question and say, well, I've got 750 words, so I'm going to do 1/6 on this question, 1/6 on this question, and 1/6 on this question, and so on. There are certainly some questions that will be more deserving of additional time than others. As we discussed earlier, going and reviewing some of your past performance reviews, speaking with others, whether it's former colleagues or supervisors, so try to get that perspective, that outside perspective, so it's not you writing about you, it's you writing about you from an outsider's perspective. And I think that's probably what is the most challenging part to this essay, is having that type of outsider's perspective on yourself. You want to, as much as possible, be unbiased. Obviously, you want to tout your accomplishments. You want to talk about why you're great and why you're different and how you'll be able to contribute in ways that other applicants cannot. But don't necessarily overlook those areas that could potentially be enhanced or improved by an MBA. And actually, one of the questions is prompting you to do just that, is saying what areas are there for improvement. And don't just brush over this question, because what you can do is utilize this question as an opportunity to talk about the value of an MBA. If you're trying to build a justification for why you want to go to Sloan, and you say, well, I'm great, I do everything perfectly, then why do you even need an MBA? Versus if you say, well, I'm great, I do a lot of things really well, but there's a couple things that could use some improvement or I really need to work on, and then show admissions officers how Sloan is going to help you refine those skills or address some of those potential weaknesses, that's going to allow you to build a much stronger argument for why you should be admitted to that program. As we discussed earlier, admissions officers really would benefit from your using some quantifiable examples. So accomplishments are one thing, but if you can quantify the accomplishments, it does allow admissions officers to put your accomplishments into perspective with other applicants who are perhaps coming from other industries, other functional roles. And then finally, try to utilize a mix of examples. Now, in this case, it's going to be primarily professional because this is coming from a past supervisor, but maybe you have some experience with that past supervisor outside of work. And if so, highlighting that could be an interesting way that gives admissions officers a different perspective on who you are as an applicant outside of work, not just someone who is able to discuss some of your accomplishments in the office. So just to go one step deeper into this particular question, for each of these bullets, I've tried to list just some additional tips that we would recommend. So how long and in what capacity have you known the applicant? This is something that you really don't want to waste any space on. Short, to the point, maybe a sentence or two. How does the applicant stand out from others in a similar capacity? As I was saying earlier, it's about putting your accomplishments into perspective, quantify the accomplishments if at all possible, discuss how your accomplishments have been different from colleagues of yours that are in a similar position. Now, with the example of the accomplishment's impact, or excuse me, of the applicant's impact, obviously you want to use an example that you didn't utilize in your first essay. You don't want there to be any redundancy in the examples that you're utilizing. And just think also about tone. You definitely want to be enthusiastic of yourself in your own letter of recommendation, but try to keep it somewhat, again, unbiased, and there's definitely a fine line between going a little bit overboard and just hyping yourself up and talking about how great you are and just being, you know, a little bit more nuanced in that. This next question, it's pretty important because they want to know, like, how your interaction with colleagues or with others will potentially reflect on you as a student in the future. So when you're talking about a representative example here, think about your interaction with future classmates. Like maybe you've mentored others, and when you're in business school, you could also mentor others. Or maybe you've come to the assistance of someone who was pushing up against a deadline. Maybe in business school, you could do that too. So with these types of examples, and in particular this representative example of how you interact with others, if you can relate it to what you think would be most favorably looked upon as a student at MIT, then try to incorporate that type of example. And then we touched on this briefly on the last slide, but personal, professional characteristics would you change? And as I mentioned before, if you can talk about how these changes will complement your ability to achieve the career goal that you're indicating an interest in achieving, then all the better, because it's going to show that you're able to better justify your interest in going to Sloan. And then you have, please tell us anything else. And you could answer that, or if space doesn't permit, that's something that you don't necessarily need to address. And then last, I just want to run through the optional essay, and trying to be mindful also so that we have like around 5 minutes or so to answer any other questions that have come up over the course of this presentation. So the essay prompt for the optional essay is talking about how you can share anything else that you'd like for the admissions officers to know about you in any format. And as I said earlier in the presentation, typically an optional essay is reserved really for extenuating circumstances. Broadly, we see, at least here at AcceptU, 4 instances in which an optional essay might typically be utilized. Academic performance, certainly one area. Perhaps undergraduate GPA is not where it needs to be, or GMAT. Analytical and quantitative skills, if they're not really up to par, maybe coming from a non-traditional business background, you want to try to proactively address any concerns that admissions officers might have about that. If you have a gap in your work experience, then that likely would be explained in an optional essay. Or if you have opted not to receive, or if you are unable to receive a letter of recommendation from your direct supervisor. Those are the typical 4 situations we see where it would warrant an optional essay. But kind of considering the limitation of these required essays from Sloan, you could also consider an optional essay to round out your other 2 essays. You can't just rehash your other essays, but what I would recommend is going back to that initial list of 3 to 5 differentiators and make sure that you've highlighted all of them. And if you haven't highlighted all of them, then maybe this is a good area for you to throw in a couple of these other differentiators that you haven't had an opportunity to highlight. Ideally, the differentiators are in support of your either career interests and career goals, and/or your contributions as a student on campus. And then if you have been weighted a little bit too heavily, say, to the professional side, then you can use an optional essay to talk more on the personal side. And we talked a bit earlier about having a good balance between personal and professional. They welcome any format, we would say that really there are 3 formats that you should seriously consider. The first is just a written essay. Keep it under 500 words. The second format is a PowerPoint, and the third is a YouTube video, or you can put it on Vimeo, or you can put it on any video hosting website. You can be creative with an optional essay if you want, if you think that it will be helpful to you, but you always want to stay professional. Don't push the boundaries too far there. And then lastly, I just wanted to end with a couple of tips, and then we'll have a little bit of time to answer your questions. Once you're ready to kind of get going, again, reread the instructions. Make sure that you answer these questions to your fullest ability. You always want to be direct, to the point, and engaging. Open these essays with something that's really exciting to admissions officers, that really makes them want to read more. Think about how many of these essays they're going to read and how repetitive and even boring that process can become. So open your essays with something that really catches them. Your creativity can be rewarded, but to an extent, and rely on examples. It's all about the examples. And then finally, don't forget to proofread, don't forget to iterate with your editing, and don't forget to polish your essays. So just to wrap up today, we went through a lot of information. I think it's always helpful to kind of take a step back and say, what did we just learn? We started with goals around the MIT application essays. We talked also about how to strategically approach the writing process even before you begin working on your essays. We analyzed both of the MIT Sloan essays as well as the optional essay for this year, and then we wrapped up very quickly with just some general tips on getting started with the application essay writing process. So with all that said, we've got a couple of last minutes here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to chat them over, and I will do my best to answer them in the time that we have remaining. The first question is, how does a diverse background add to the applicant's profile? It's just another means for differentiation. And a diverse background, if you think about admissions officers trying to build diversity within their classes, can be quite helpful. It can be quite beneficial because they need to have diversity within their class. They can't have students all coming from the same background. So if you have some diversity with your background, you should be utilizing it to your fullest advantage. The next question here is, does the essay have to be in a paragraph format, or is it okay to submit an essay in PowerPoint or Q&A? I would go more with just straightforward paragraph. I think that, like I said before, creativity can be rewarded, but only to a certain extent. So you can be creative with your writing. You can be creative with an optional essay, but I wouldn't veer too far off of what's traditionally expected with these types of application essays. There's another question here about with regard to what makes us unique in the personal context. It seems a bit difficult to tie that into how a candidate would contribute to class discussions. How do you tie together your personal context with your professional background? So you have to, it's all about the underlying story. I mean, we talked earlier about how admissions officers are more interested in the process than they are in the result. And so let's take, for example, if you overcame some real significant hardship personally, I don't know, health, family, or otherwise, and you were really successful despite that, that's showing admissions officers that you have certain qualities. It's not showing them that you're going to be able to contribute to classroom discussions because of that experience, but it does help them identify certain qualities that they want to see in their students. And so it's about trying to help them see those qualities through both personal and professional experiences. There's another question here about what is the extent of creativity that can be used? Video, art, cartoon strips, too much? I wouldn't say so. I mean, videos are, this is about the optional essay, videos have been utilized in the optional essay for Sloan. I mean, they actually, you know, it wouldn't be that out of the realm. Art cartoon strips, that could be interesting. I'd love to see an effective cartoon strip that was even maybe a little bit humorous. I think that could be really interesting and unique. But again, don't take it too far. And then another question here about, do I talk in the second person for the second essay? It is as if it was coming from your your previous direct supervisor. So it should be written in that way. So I think that seems to be all of the questions that we have time for. I wish that we had a little bit of more time to answer additional questions. But what I would say is that if you do have additional questions or more specific questions, please contact our group, AcceptU. As I mentioned, for those of you who might have missed the first couple of minutes of the presentation, our team here at AcceptU is comprised entirely of former MBA admissions officers from top 20 business schools, and we do offer an initial admissions assessment with one of our former MBA admissions officers, and you can sign up for that by going to that link that's up on your screen now, learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. And then for those of you who are either viewing today or who want to, or who are viewing this presentation in the future, please download a copy of this presentation from our website, learnmore.acceptu.com/MIT. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up. We are going to be doing a chat party on the MIT Sloan boards right now on Beat the GMAT. And I'd also encourage you all to join us again next week. We're going to be doing a similar essay analysis for Talk, and you can register and get the additional information for that specific Write Like an Expert presentation at Beat the GMAT. So with all that said, thank you again for attending today. Thanks for all the great questions. I hope that it was helpful, and we look forward to continued collaboration with Beat the GMAT and wish you all the best of luck in the application process. Thanks so much.